All right, how is everyone doing today? Welcome to my channel. This channel is for educational purposes. And, excuse me. And we generally look at great theories of everything, ancient and modern, cosmologies, all-encompassing theories, grand unified theories, mostly obscure, probably haven't heard of them. And we try to dice them up and help you figure out how to best use them in your lives for paradigm shifting, awakening to 5D consciousness, formation of a holistic worldview, and quests for better physical, mental, and spiritual health. Today is our 75th video that we have done on the book by Daniel Ingram called Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha. And this is not so much a book about Buddhism, but about the core teachings of the Buddha. So, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. We may not want to be Buddhists. I certainly don't. But within their tradition, there is a core of stuff that's very useful for you, regardless of what religion, if any, that you follow. And Ingram does a good job of bringing that out. In particular, he focuses on meditation, and I see it as very much of a technology or a science, reproducible experiences that you have when you sit down or stand up or lie down and pay attention to what's going on. Two types of meditation he distinguishes: concentration meditation on an object, and insight meditation on the investigation of the three characteristics of your sensations. Your five senses and your mental sensations all have the three characteristics of of impermanence, dissatisfactoriness, and no self. So as you investigate your sensations and that becomes clear to you, then you gradually move around the cycle of insight through the various stages of mind that Dr. Ingram maps out here for you in this book. But we are in a later chapter that is on what you would call enlightenment models. So this is kind of various ways that different Buddhist traditions identify whether you are enlightened or not. Some of them are quite absurd. Some of them are targets for ridicule from him. And some of them he kind of has arrived at through melding, blending different ones. So he's got his own model. But right now we're on what he calls the special models. And within this section, he goes through an extensive discussion of a few different forms of narcissism that kind of are inherent in these special models. So we're going to take over right there from where we left off last time. In that vein, it is entirely possible that you, the reader, have significant narcissistic tendencies or have another significant personality disorder. We all have aspects of one or more of the personality disorders. A touch of narcissism here, a bit of histrionic there, but for some people, these are more than mere tendencies and instead pervade them to the core. If this is you, Consider that insight into these conditions can improve your life substantially and allow you to get some of your needs met in more skillful ways, as well as allow you to seek the help you need to address these challenges. Further, it is also possible that some of your spiritual friends and mentors will also have these personality disorders. None of the personality disorders necessarily prevent mastery of either concentration states or bare insights or bare insight. This, I recognize, is a strong statement with vast implications, but it's true. Because of this, we find a reasonable number of spiritual teachers who also have major personality disorders or traits, such as narcissism, borderline, and antisocial personality disorders. It is therefore not surprising that some of the most compelling, dazzling, and charismatic spiritual teachers fall into this category. As whatever else you think of people with personality disorders, they are typically very interesting, often entertaining, and sometimes extremely attractive. It has been observed that people without the cluster B personality disorders do not seem to sizzle in the way that those with them sometimes may. In just that way, many good meditation teachers without those disorders have a hard time creating as much spiritual buzz, specialness, exclusiveness, and grandness as teachers with more cluster B traits. Also, lofty and idealizing spiritual teachings and practices, being very special, may be more prone to attracting narcissists who are then encouraged to master those practices over more mundane pursuits, which can yield practitioners who thereby destroy any chances of realizing the profound teaching. Before enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. Any practitioner who sees him or herself as above service in the form of cleaning or grunt work has missed an important part of training in morality. While narcissists privilege themselves and their agendas over others, the training in morality will remain shallow. Often tending toward perfectionism, some narcissists will do the work it takes to perfect their meditation craft. Just because you are a narcissist doesn't necessarily mean you are lazy. Many high-functioning narcissists are found at the top of their fields. The same is true in the world of meditation. However, evidence shows that awakened narcissists are often still straightforwardly narcissistic, much to many an idealist's chagrin. Numerous contemporary examples evidence this disconcerting fact. As contemporary psychology points out, the personality disorders tend to be relatively hardwired, and despite Buddhism's frequent claims to free the mind of defilements, the personality disorders are proving to be hard nuts to crack, as it were. Met some obvious narcissist who claims to have eliminated their narcissism by their amazing practice in record time? Don't believe the hype. Clearly, more good research is needed on the relationship between the traditions, their adherents, the results of practice, and the personality disorders. The more you read about narcissism, the more it can seem that basically all the world's spiritual traditions were highly decorated with flourishes of grandiosity by narcissists. This grandiosity seems to have had a sticking power that even non-narcissists have a hard time purging once it has gotten in. In fact, this book clearly contains numerous grandiose elements, as I'm sure you have noticed, and I in no way claim to be free of some grandiose and flamboyant tendencies. However, if you look more closely, hopefully you will see that I have done my flawed best to try to strip out the grandiose false advertising into ground claims and the promotion of spiritual practice in terms, concepts, effective practice, and results that have been reproduced today and hold up to down-to-earth reality testing by actual mortals, results that you can realistically achieve also by simply following time-tested instructions. Finally, if we navigate the intricate play of the various pathological manifestations of specialness in our chosen tradition, investigate our own flawed, ordinary human life as it actually is, and successfully attain wisdom, it is very, very easy to transfer that specialness onto ourselves. Even awakened beings who aren't formally diagnosable as having one of these personality disorders can, through long conditioning by the elaborately enumerated and relentlessly advertised theories on the specialness of those who are realized, fall squarely into the traps that the misunderstood ideals of the tradition have laid for them. So, is it true that there is something special about awakened beings? Well, yes, which obviously doesn't help the problem of narcissism relating to realization. However, the specialness is not only hard to explain, it is typically nothing like the specific marks of specialness that the traditions advertise, as it is about something in a relationship to sensate phenomena much more than it is about anything else. This is extremely confusing, even to some awakened beings, and it can take years or decades to sort out the implications of clear perception on the bare truth of sensate experience and what is special about it, and what is just hype, projection, scripting, and mimicry. Remember that it is very ordinary mammals that get awakened, and keep that mammalian nature firmly in mind when the concept of special rears its hydra-like head. Often the least flashy, least grandiose, and most down-to-earth traditions and techniques offer the highest level of empowering support for good practice that keeps it and you real and reduces suffering. Okay, now this next section is called the social models. In the same vein as the love models and the special models are the social models. These tend to involve all sorts of social implications or issues around awakening. For instance, we may imagine that enlightenment will automatically have certain desirable social implications, such as being accepted in a specific social role, like that of teacher, guide, mentor, spiritual friend, guru, leader, avatar, etc. This usually involves some poorly defined group of people accepting us. While spiritual attainments and unrelated qualities can sometimes inspire people to view us in these ways, there are absolutely no guarantees. As I have pointed out before, plenty of people with wisdom have been ridiculed, ostracized, persecuted, attacked, jailed, tortured, and murdered when they spoke from that place. In short, any social repercussions of an individual's realization will be at the mercy of ordinary causal reality, just as with everything else. And ordinary causal reality can really suck sometimes. Further, most people don't really have any clue what awakening is about, don't think that awakening really exists today, and may not have awakening as part of their view of what is possible or even desirable, or may even find the notion that what you think you are enlightened to be a threat to their intelligence, a threat to their religious beliefs, or an indication of your grandiosity, arrogance, delusion, or psychosis, and they might just be partially correct. Having lived with these issues for over a decade, I can tell you that these reactions are as likely to be found in the social circles of Buddhism as they are in the social circles of any other meditative or non-meditative religious or non-religious tradition. Other social models involve enlightenment having something to do with other people's opinions regarding whether we are awakened, meaning that enlightenment is purely a social convention or collective designation and has nothing to do with reality or an individual's perception of it. In this model, just as we may elect a president, so it is with enlightenment. This is common in many Western Buddhist circles, including some major retreat centers in which they all bow to the senior teacher lists and yet hold the paradigm that no one really gets enlightened. While this is all basically the neurosis and confusion of spiritual children, there are some real practical truths hidden in this model. Our direct perception of reality will depend on our practice and insights. So any attempts at directly promoting similar insights in others will be greatly helped or hindered by what people think of us, whether we are given some title, whether a lineage authorizes us to serve as a teacher in that lineage, and whether the concepts and language we use to describe and promote our realization fit in with the cultural expectations and norms of our social circles. Remember the scarecrow in The Wizard of Oz who had a brain made of straw but felt so much better about his intellect when he was given a diploma? The social models often predict similar effects on the spiritual path. Further, there are those who falsely think they are enlightened because someone else thinks they are. And there are many people on senior teacher lists who probably shouldn't be there. One way or another, it is worth examining our deepest beliefs regarding the social implications we imagine will occur when we get enlightened or more enlightened. These can have a big impact on our practice, our motivation to practice, and what kinds of successes and failures we have in spreading insights around once we have insights ourselves. Unfortunately, most of our beliefs are likely to be somewhat unrealistic, springing from the understandable human grasping for recognition, role, and social status. The serotonergic, don't know that word, serotonergic, serotonergic buzz of status feels very nice. Again, the further we find our dreams, I guess that's from serotonin. Okay, so again, the further we find our dreams are from our current reality, the more we need to look at what is happening right now, with those dreams and needs being one small part of the transient causal sensations that are arising and vanishing. Stated in practical terms, and by way of example, you could be a medical graduate who had trained well in some medical school in another country, completed a good residency there, be perfectly qualified to practice from the point of view of knowledge, experience, and talent, and yet not be allowed to practice in the United States until you had jumped through all the administrative and educational hoops. The same problem can arise when people go outside of a tradition or partially outside it and yet do very good insight work. They have the knowledge but not the social designation. That said, it also gives freedom to speak out without worrying about those channels liking what you say. And as you are probably noticing, there is much about the standard channels to speak about. I myself exist in a gray area like this, as do many contemporary teachers and practitioners. I have accomplished much using the techniques of the Theravada, a tradition that explicitly says that only monks can know what I know, and sometimes only recognizes monks as lineage holders. This is a cultural and social problem, and it highlights the truth embodied in the social models. I suspect there will be a lot more of this as the Dharma continues to adapt to our times and places and more people are successful. We need to come up with solutions to this problem that neither artificially elevate people nor artificially prevent them from sharing what they do know that is of benefit to others. Also, if you find yourself in a similar situation, I strongly recommend that you reach out and cultivate a peer group and, if possible, good mentors so that you all help keep one another on the up and up and can address problems when they arise in a way that draws on the wisdom of that community rather than on the limited perspective of those going it alone. Those who go it alone, even very wise beings, often run into various forms of trouble that even a small community providing good social support might have mitigated or prevented. Okay, this section is called the ultimate reality versus unreality models. Some traditions strongly emphasize that there are aspects of reality that have some ultimate status, and you will immediately notice that I'm clearly influenced by those traditions. By ultimate, the models generally mean something along the lines of irreducible, non-negotiable, foundational, primary, or fundamentally true. From a Theravada point of view, this is generally broken down into three ultimate dharmas, specifically physical phenomena, mental phenomena, and nirvana. This is problematic as it seems to imply that these are stable aspects. This view might be reinforced by texts such as the Abhidhamma, which basically defines itself as a manual of ultimate or irreducible aspects of phenomenal reality, particularly the sections that list mind moments that might occur in various sequences. There are pros and cons to this sort of presentation. Advocating that people ground their attention solidly in physical and mental sensations and realizing what is meant by nirvana is clearly a very good idea, leading in practice to some excellent useful effects. That said, it would be easy to read this and similar bits of Theravada theory as reifying those aspects of experience as existing in some stable or absolute way. And in fact, the Mahayana and Vajrayana often read the Theravada text exactly this way. Were we to investigate both the digital and analog aspects of our sensate reality clearly enough, as advocated by techniques such as Vipassana, we would see through, that's insight meditation, Vipassana, we would see through this possible interpretation of things existing as stable particles. However, it remains a persistent source of criticism of the Theravada by the other traditions. It is interesting to note that the Buddhist tradition that is most prone to being billed as a renunciate tradition, bent on dispassion and escape from the world, still manages to balance this with a foundation strongly grounded in this sensate reality. Some of the traditions will instead advocate for a conceptual framework that views reality as dreamlike, unreal, and use similar terms to describe what they are pointing to, concepts that might be skillfully used but are easily misinterpreted or misapplied. Such terms work very well for some practitioners, helping to unstick them from adhering to views about stable realities and to loosen unskillful aspects of attachment. It is a very different meaning system with strong implications for practice that will vary depending on the predilections of the practitioner. Those who are naturally of a greedy, pleasure-seeking disposition may benefit from having their sense that there is anything to cling to shaken by pointing out such qualities to them and advocating that they practice through such a filter. On the other hand, those who are more aversive and more prone to dissociation or symptoms of derealization may find that such teachings push them too far from a clear investigation of what is going on here and now, and into more delusional modes that are detached from what is actually going on. It is interesting to notice that traditions that are billed as strongly advocating for a bodhisattva ideal, in which one works compassionately for the salvation of all beings, still balances this with the notion that none of these things are real in any ultimate sense. Related to this discussion are academic and philosophical questions that might be categorized as the essentialist versus constructionist debates. You also occasionally see these discussions among accomplished practitioners, but it is much less common for them to take it very seriously. Essentialism states that these practices are designed to reveal something about reality that is universally true, always findable in all times, places, cultures, and humans, something intrinsic to the nature of experience. Constructionists state that these traditions and practices instead create a model of an improved, revised, idealized reality, and then go on to rewire and remodel reality at its core to try to make it conform to the ideal. Weighty tomes have been written about these topics, but I will weigh in without lengthy elaboration. Wisdom training is essentialist, and morality and concentration trainings are constructionist. Said another way, anything on the spiritual path that is truly essentialist is the domain of wisdom trainings. Anything that is truly constructionist is the domain of the other two trainings. Mature traditions contain skillful counterbalancing emphases to help reduce the tendency to give in to the shadow sides and blind spots of their various doctrines and practices. One of the primary ways they counterbalance their own conceptions of the highest abstract ideals of practice is to incorporate seemingly contradictory teachings about the foundations of the ordinary world. Still, in terms of meaning, the traditions are clearly very different in some key ways, as they continue to point out again and again. Practitioners will generally resonate with one way or another of framing practice and experience, though this can and often does change with time. And so it is good that options are offered, as those meanings that resonate with us drive motivation to practice. Thus we come to the meaning models. So this section is called the meaning models. Spiritual practice is clearly not just about sensate reality, but also contains explicit implications for what might generally be called meaning. Meaning is obviously one of the keys to how our lives will go, driving our interpretations and ever sensate experiences of essentially everything. Those interpretations clearly are profoundly causal. Remember how I was railing against exclusive emphases on content earlier in the less mature sections of this book? This is an attempt at a more mature version of that same set of points. Remember how I said that content was only half of the equation and the other half was sensate clarity? That first half, content, is still half of the point, and as such is extremely important. Clearly, the other half, that of basic sensate clarity and the insight that comes from that, is also extremely important. Putting a section on meaning in the grand sense in a section on awakening is dangerous on the one hand, and hopefully creates an appropriate contrast of axes of development on the other. Awakening as having sensate clarity about the three characteristics is one axis of development. Skillful development of a set of meanings that helps us skillfully navigate the fact of having been born into this life is another axis of development. Curiously, the first axis, that of awakening, has a natural endpoint. The second one, that of meaning, is endless. We could have a sense that awakening in the strict insight sense is meaningful, and here we begin to see some overlap. However, beyond that, the two are strangely unrelated. This is often disconcerting for practitioners, even very advanced ones, as there is often some residual part of us that somehow believes that mastering sensate clarity will perfectly inform meaning. When this fails to occur, it can cause a significant amount of angst, even in awakened beings. Each tradition generally claims to have found the best, most optimal meaning or set of meanings for the big question or the meaning of life. However, as the existentialist will be quick to point out, meaning is arbitrary. They are clearly right, at least within the framework of existentialism, as the large number of seemingly contradictory meaning structures offered by spiritual traditions and philosophies readily demonstrates. It is all illusion. It is all pure love. It is all emptiness. It is all the Tao. It is all God. Each of these clearly has a totally different feel, and a person subscribing to one of them will likely interpret reality different from someone subscribing to another, even if they both have a high degree of sensate clarity. These interpretations will clearly have radically different implications for the relative aspects of how we think, feel, speak, and act. This is where the Buddhists come in, as they will remind you that meaning is causal. Meaning is causal in its arising, as it arises naturally from specific conditions that are biological, psychological, and cultural at a minimum. Meaning is also clearly a cause for other phenomena to arise, and one of the moderating causes for how meaning creates conditions is the relationship to the meaning itself as it arises and vanishes. Meaning, when perceived very clearly in the light of awakening, is likely to produce better outcomes, it seems, as meaning is part thought, part feeling, and part something else that is hard to define without circular definitions. As we have seen, what happens around thoughts and feelings benefits from clear perception. Still, beyond just the clear perception, there are relative implications of the specific meanings that arise, and so the question of which meanings will produce the best outcomes is hotly debated, and strong opinions on this tend to be a core component of spiritual traditions. Even those traditions that propose doctrines along the lines of the highest meaning is to transcend meaning, that still conveys meaning. As all traditions seem to have a monolithic confidence that their meaning structure is the optimal one, conflicts are inevitable, as we see again and again when the various traditions interact. Two traditions that agree almost completely on teachings related to sensate reality can still be perpetually at each other's throats when it comes to questions of optimal meaning. Most traditions generally don't think along the lines of optimal when it relates to their stock recommended meanings. They just have their meanings, forgetting that they have those meanings for some hopefully good reasons. Obviously, this sort of pragmatism as a lens through which to view meaning structures is itself a statement of meaning in some way, but please forgive this point, since if you throw out pragmatism,